Mr. Bob Kerr from the Bay Institute, and then Councilwoman Miller, then Ms. Berman. Mr. Bob Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Council. I'm Gary Bobker, Program Director at the Bay Institute. I'm speaking today on behalf of both the Bay Institute and the Natural Resources Defense Council. The Bay Institute and NRDC were part of the many groups that were involved in helping to draft and pass the Delta Reform Act of 2009. The Council and the Delta Plan were a critical part of the reforms that were identified and enacted in that legislation. Our intention was for there to be a place and a plan that really defined what the future of the Delta should be. What, according to our society's desires and policies, the Delta as an ecosystem, the Delta as a place, the Delta as a water supply, as part of the water supply system should be. We knew that the Delta Plan and the work of the Council was not going to be a radical reform in and of itself. It is not a primary vehicle of change. It is rather a catalyst in a way. It's by defining that future and then by offering incentives and disincentives to all the programs and projects that are occurring in the Delta, hopefully creating some consistency with that future Delta. So I think it's important in looking at the expectations for the Delta Plan not to have too high expectations. This was not going to be the solution in and of itself. We knew that. On the other hand, I think that it's extremely important that you have clarity about what the future Delta is to drive the policies and the regulations that you adopt. And I think that where you are today is kind of a rough draft of that definition of the future Delta, and not really the clarity that you need. I've talked about in the future. I've talked in the past when I've come before you the need to define outcomes and to have develop performance metrics, and this reflects a belief I have that if you're not going to, and I think it's appropriate that you don't, if you're not going to go into the details of saying, here are the specific programs and projects that you as a land use manager or a water use agency should do, if you don't want to get into that kind of command and control structure, what you have to do is actually be outcome-based. You have to be very clear to say that we want your programs and your projects to result in this kind of Delta ecosystem, to result in this kind of pattern of water use. It's ironic to me that the performance metrics, the definitions of the future Delta that were in the Delta Vision Strategic Plan were probably more detailed than you actually have in the plan today. The discussion that we had earlier of WRP1, I think, is very instructive in this. Now, I've been part of the debate over WRP1, and I'm not going to repeat my particular TBI's and NRDC's positions on WRP1, but I want to use it as an example, and that is to say, the language that you have in WRP1 now will, I think, it allows either for a reduction in your diversions or it allows for a reduction in the percentage of use by doing other things. And as staff said, I agree with staff in that that policy will most likely incentivize diversification of water use strategies in areas that use water from the Delta. And as a matter of statewide policy, that's a good thing. But this is a Delta plan. And if, as those of us who worked on the Delta Reform Act hoped, we're trying to reduce the actual pressure on the Delta ecosystem, then WRP1 probably is not going to achieve that. If we are trying to reduce the actual risk to areas that export water from the Delta, the actual risk, not the relative risk, then WRP1 is probably not going to do that. Now, I'm not asking you to change the language at this hour. What I'm saying is that it's the lack of clarity about what it is that you are trying to achieve as a policy that makes this a less than utilitarian policy from my point of view, because the high degree of risk to the Delta ecosystem from the level of use that we have today, and the high degree of risk to areas that are dependent on the Delta, is not necessarily going to change as a result of this policy. Which leads me to where I think you need to go next. And really I don't want to focus on changing anything in the plan. I mean, I think you pretty much are at the point where you probably just need to adopt the plan and move on. But you should adopt the plan with the specific proviso that right away, not in 5 years when you're due for a revision, but right away, you're going to complete the missing parts of the plan. And I would suggest the missing parts of the plan are the performance metrics that will define what you mean by things like reducing reliance on the Delta or restoring the Delta ecosystem or other policies. And it may include some other things. You've heard from other folks about some kind of analyses that should be performed either by you or by parties that are proposing programs and policies. The point, though, is that your work doesn't stop when you adopt the plan and then you start implementing and you think, well, we're going to revise it later. You actually have unfinished business that adopting the plan doesn't substitute for. And if you adopt the plan today or tomorrow, what I would suggest is that you also commit to do some high priority things in terms of developing a complete set of performance metrics within 1 year of adoption of the plan, and any other elements that are required to make the implementation of the policies and program and regulations meaningful and measurable. I think I'll leave it at that. It's a harangue you've heard from me before, perhaps just dressed up a little differently. Thank you. Thank you for your years of working on this and for the years you're going to have to continue to work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Bodker.